Great. Welcome everybody to this presentation. This presentation is going to be given by Jamie Dunley and Ren Yu Zhang and is titled Watch the Gap, Connecting Reading Ability and Reading Demands in Teacher Education Colleges in Myanmar. Jamie Dunley works on a range of language test development and validation projects for assessment systems designed and developed by the British Council, as well as collaborating on projects with researchers and organisations internationally. Jamie joined the British Council in 2013 and was previously Chief Researcher at the Icon Foundation of Japan, a not-for-profit organisation which develops and administers EFL examinations in Japan. He has 25 years of experience working in EFL education, first as a teacher, then in test development and production and assessment research. Ren Yu is Research Assistant at the Assessment Research Group, British Council. She has been involved in various projects, including several standard setting questionnaire analysis projects and text analysis projects. Ren Yu has an academic background in psychology and education. She has just started her PhD this October at Oxford, and her project is to investigate the effects of psychological factors and L1 on young children's English, L2 phonological learning. If anyone has any questions, please type them in the chat and we'll have a short Q&A after the presentation. Great, Ren Yu and Jamie, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'll just share my screen. So can everybody see my screen there? Is that okay? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, I can see it clearly.
Okay, well, we better get back to the beginning. That would be a good place to start, wouldn't it? Rather than starting in the middle. Okay. Okay, good morning, everybody. So watch the gap. We're going to be talking about connecting reading ability and reading demands in teacher education colleges in Myanmar. So just to give you a brief introduction, Will's already sort of given an overview of who we are. We work with the Assessment Research Group, which is a global unit in the British Council focused on education research, particularly around language assessment. Both Ren Yu and I are based in the UK. And Ren Yu's in Oxford and I'm in London, and it's 5:40 here. So if either of us fall asleep during the presentation, someone please reach over and poke us and wake us up. It does certainly feel like we're in the conference room with you, and it's been a very enjoyable experience so far to be able to get this chance to exchange ideas as we do in these forums. So we'll jump straight into the presentation then. So just to give you some background to what we're going to be talking about today. So what I want to point out is that our study, the study that Ren Yu and I'll be introducing, is a very small part of what is a much bigger education reform program in Myanmar that the British Council is engaged in. So this is part of what is called the acronym TREE, Towards Results in Education and English. Specifically, we have worked on a part of the TREE project which is focused on teacher education, training primary school teachers. The program itself, though, the Education Reform Program, is part of a, once again, much larger project, which is a 5-year Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office program, and focused on education reform. So you're looking at designing new curriculum materials, changing the content of instruction, and within that wider program, we were looking at the teacher education colleges. One thing to point out, and this is something that's critical to the discussion we're going to have, is that part of this was introducing English as a medium of instruction for teacher education colleges, so that the actual training and the materials of the teachers, the primary school teachers, not just for English, but for other subjects, were being created in English. Now, there's a lot of rationales and reasoning behind that decision, and you can find out more about the project here if you visit the link at the bottom there at the British Council, and you can learn more about it. So another important thing to keep in mind is that we are focused on an area of expertise that we have, but we don't in any way, shape or form pretend to be local experts on the Myanmar educational context. So we collaborated very closely with the project team on the ground there who are engaged with that context, and we were providing the expertise that we have in assessment to be able to feed into this project. Now, what we did was part of what was called the Inception Phase. This 5-year project is ongoing now. we took part in the Inception Phase last summer, so from June or July through to September. It was a very rapid baselining opportunity to pull together a number of small studies, really, to feed into the planning for the implementation of the main project. And a spoiler alert, if any of you attended the panel discussion yesterday, there was some discussion around the effect of that Inception Phase and how our study contributed to it. Okay, so that was, we'll talk about that at the end. The title for our strand today is about real-life language use. And actually, I'd take it one step further. This presentation sort of demonstrates not just real-life language use and connecting assessment, but real-life decisions and policy making. So moving on very quickly, this study is a gap analysis. And what does that mean? That is an evaluation of the degree of match or the gap between the reading ability of learners and the reading demands of materials that they may have to access or utilize in their study or work. In this particular case, that gap analysis that we're doing is looking at student teachers and teacher educators in teacher education colleges in Myanmar. And I think colleges is misspelled there, never mind. Anyway, so what we're trying to do is to compare the results to the reading demands of English language materials that the teacher education programs would be using. So these are new materials being created for the new curriculum, and the idea once again was to have these materials in English. So English is the medium of instruction for the teacher, the student teachers. So the tools that we will be using and that have made this study possible: one, we have the Aptis test. The Aptis test is a 4 skills test, okay? And what's important about the Aptis test is that it's designed to report in terms of the Common European Framework of Reference levels, the CEFR levels. I won't give any more detail about the test here because you can go online and find out all of the technical information about the test there. What's important to remember is it's a 4 skills test. We'll be looking mostly at reading. It's delivered online, and that this is linked or aligned with the Common European Framework of Reference levels, which are on the left of that scale there. So going from A0 through to A1, which is a beginner level, A2, B1 into the intermediate levels, then B2 into advanced levels, and beyond into the C level. So that's the scale of proficiency that we'll be using. The other important measure or tool that we have is we will be using the Lexile. The Lexile Framework for Reading is a very, very useful tool which brings together the measurement of reading ability and the measurement of reading text complexity. Now, what is useful about this is it puts those two things onto a common scale. You can see the scale in the middle here, and we go from 200 lexiles through to 1200 lexiles. And that is sort of like the advanced level of reading up here at the top there. And what this means is that you can match a reader's ability to the text. So you can see that if a reader is at 700 lexile ability, and then a book is at 700 lexiles in terms of its complexity, the interpretation you have is that that reader will be able to access that text without a great deal of frustration. There will be a certain amount of accessibility and comprehensibility. So matching readers to text is the benefit of the Lexile. Now, the Aptis test is aligned not just with the CEFR, but with the Lexile Framework for Reading. So what we've done in this study is bring together the Aptis test to measure reading ability. We've then transferred those results to CEFR scores and Lexile scores, and we're able to then measure the Lexile reading complexity of texts as well. You can see here the alignment that is done between Lexile. What we've got is the Lexile measures, the thresholds for the Lexile measures in terms of CEFR levels. So if you're an A2 reader, you will have approximately a 750 Lexile, which means that if you approach a book that is 750 Lexiles, you will be able to get into that text without a great deal of frustration. Whereas an A2 reader confronted with, for example, a B2 level text of 1000 Lexiles would experience a great deal of frustration and not be able to access that text. So that is a key measurement instrument that we're using. And that Renu, I'm now going to hand over to Renu to talk you through the methodology in detail, because actually Renu did most of the hard work on this study, and also talking about the results. And I'll come back and get back into some of that discussion of what the impact on the policy was from our small study. Over to you, Renu.
Thank you, Jamie. So now to the methodology section. First, I'll just talk about how the measurement for the reading demand. So as Jamie has mentioned, the reading demand is indicated by the Lexile measure of text from the teacher education college's materials. So for example, the course syllabus, the teacher's guide, student's book. So I'll now talk about how we selected the text that were used for analysis. So as you can see here, we received 15 folders of materials from the project team. Folder 1 to 14 includes subject-specific documents, while the last folder, folder 15, contains resources and guidelines for overall curriculum development. So when entering the text into the Lexile analyzer, the text will need to be cleaned according to the user guide. And also for each document, there's actually multiple pages that we need to enter manually. So due to time constraints, not all folders were included in analysis. And instead, a sample of 6 folders were analyzed. And here is the folder sampling process. So as you can see, there are 3 steps. Step 1, all documents so it's categorized documents in each folder. And that means all documents from the 15 folders were listed down in the Excel spreadsheet. And also we recorded the page number for each document, the document format, the word count, and also the language for each document. So whether it was English or Burmese. Step 2 is to remove all of the unanalyzable documents. So by unanalyzable, we mean duplicated documents within each folder, scanned documents, Burmese documents, and all other documents that's not in TXT format or Excel or DOC format. Step 3 contains 3 further steps of selection criteria. A is that the folder needs to be subject specific. So if you remember from the last slide, folder 15 was actually about the more broader and general curriculum material. So that folder was removed. 3B, which is either the whole folder is analyzed or it is excluded. That means that there was no sampling of documents within the folder. And C, the selected folders will need to be representative of important subject areas. So all of the 14 folders, folder 1 to 14, can be divided into 3 subject areas, STEM subject areas, humanities, and education studies. And we selected 2 folders from each of these subject areas. Okay, so following this procedure, we selected 6 folders: English, Science, Social Studies, Math, Local Curriculum, and Reflective Practice and Essential Skills. According to the Lexile Analyzer user guide, I just mentioned that the text need to be edited following certain guidelines before being entered into the Lexile Analyzer. So one example is all incompleted sentences like chapter titles and headings will need to be removed. Another thing is that, as suggested by MetaMetrics, for documents under 100 pages, all pages were included in the analysis, but for those that have 100 and above, only a portion of the text was sampled. And moreover, to make sure the texts were handled properly by me, a sample of documents from the 6 selected folders were sent to an expert in MetaMetrics for reanalysis. We then compared our results, which match. So that means the text preparation procedure were done properly and that the Lexile measure results are reliable. So here is a table that shows an overview of the selected documents. As you can see from the 4th column, sorry. That's a lot of number of pages included in the folders. And if you have a look at the last column, around 40% to 54% of materials were actually unanalyzable. Okay, now, so we just talked about the text preparation procedure for measuring reading demand, and we're now going to talk briefly about the measurement for reading ability. So the participants are 79 teacher educators and 160 student teachers from 4 different teacher education colleges. This is to help ensure the representativeness of the sample. and all of them took the 4-skill Aptis test that Jamie just talked about earlier. And for the purpose of this gap analysis, we just focus on the reading test. Okay, so let's now have a look at the results of the reading demands. This chart you're looking at right now is a horizontal box plot chart that captures the Lexile measure of analyzable documents in the 6 folders. So the line in the middle that divides the green and red part is the median for each group, and the whole block represents the interquartile range. As you can see here, the first 2 subjects, so it's the education studies subject areas, the reflective practice essential skills, and the local curriculum materials have the highest and second highest medians. The science STEM subjects, math and science, have the lowest and second lowest medians. This makes sense because for the math and science subject materials, that they contain a lot of numbers and step-by-step guide for calculation, for example. So most of the text and sentences are quite short. Okay, now we further categorize the documents into 4 categories in terms of intended readers for a more detailed comparison. This is because when I was going through the materials, it's quite clear that some of them just has the label of teacher's book, and some of them have, student's guide, for example. So there's clearly different intended readers for the materials. So there are 4 categories. One is materials for children. So these are like activities sheet, student's book. The second category is materials for student teachers. So for example, teacher's guide. The third category is materials for teacher educators. So for example, lesson plans. The final category is for both student teacher and teacher educators. One example would be the curriculum brochure they have. You might notice that the children category has a wider spread of Lexile measure, and that is because these documents have a wider variety from activity sheet that contain minimal text to textbook that contains paragraphs. Now to the reading ability results. So this is the Aptis reading CEFR level distribution for teacher educators. As you can see here, the median for them is B1. That means 82% of them are B1 or below, and 42% of teacher educators are A2 or below. So to the student teachers, their median is lower, which is A2. That means 95% of them are B1 or below, and 69% are A2 or below. So now let's combine the reading demand results and the reading ability results. You might remember from the box plot chart earlier that shows the interquartile range of Lexile measures for documents in each of the 6 folders. So this is the same graph, but this time I've put down 2 CEFR ranges. One is the orange bit, which is the A2 range, and one is the purple bit, that's the B1 range. So these 2 ranges represent the reading ability of student teachers and teacher educators respectively. So you can see that there is a clear gap between the reading demands of the education college teaching materials in the 6 folders and the reading ability of teacher educators and student teachers. So for student teachers, as you can see from the orange bit, the vast majority of texts will be beyond the median reading ability range for them. And now if you look at the purple range, so for teacher educators, this situation is slightly better. So as you can see, their reading ability overlaps with a large amount of the text. However, this may facilitate their own access to the text, but not necessarily leave them with the enough spare cognitive resources to devote to helping the student teachers access the same text. And you might also remember from one of the frequency bar chart earlier that 42% of the teacher educators were also tested at A2 or A1 level, So that means the comprehension rate for these readers will be similar to the comprehension rate for student teachers. And what's more, if you look at the more academic-focused education studies, the top two subjects or folders, these texts will be well beyond the level of the majority of teacher educators. As you can see, there are almost no overlap. So that will result in a predicted drop in the comprehension rate for these important pedagogical studies materials. So now I'll hand back to Jamie to talk a bit about what we learned from this gap analysis.
Okay, so what we're going to be talking about now is the so what question. What did we learn? What's the point? The whole point of this strand is connecting assessment with real life language use. And as I said, taking it one step further and saying, not just real life language use, but real life decisions and policy making. So the whole point of this study was to feed into the planning. It was part of the inception phase. It was to feed into the planning for the wider 5-year project. So what we were able to do is identify potential issues in accessibility for teacher educators and student teachers with the materials that had been produced for training in the new curriculum. Now, this was really important because this allowed for the project team on the ground, the people who are the local experts, to engage with the planning to make sure they can build in interventions and support. So there is, hopefully a happy ending to this story. Although we identified issues, that was for the purpose of then coming in and developing solutions. So if you did attend the panel discussion on policy making yesterday, you would have heard Alison Barrett discuss one of the outcomes of the inception phase, which was a decision to actually produce materials in Burmese language as well, and to give students, teachers the ability or the choice to access the materials that they felt most comfortable with. So this is a really important policy intervention, which hopefully will make the implementation and the goals of the TREE project much more realizable. So connecting testing with real world languages, the important thing we've learned here, or what we've hoped to show here, is that testing goes beyond the test itself. Very often tests can just finish with results, rank ordering, or as gatekeeping devices. And what we're saying here is, no, this is actually showing how we can use the tests to engage with a wider activity, a planning and program for teacher training. So what do the scores from a test mean in practice? And what can I do with the results? Well, hopefully today we've shown that tests can be something beyond just a painful experience for the test taker, and they can actually be used for really meaningful real world interventions to make change, and for positive change, hopefully. So policy design and implementation, what are the implications? You need to have evidence to base your policy on. Now, if you did once again go to the policy discussion yesterday from a range of rich contexts and very experienced people in this area, you will have heard that obviously evidence is not the only thing that our policy will be based on. There are a whole kind of intersection of political and other dynamics that will take place. But having evidence to base your decisions on is really important. Not just impressions, not just my subjective judgment, but having that evidence base to make the decisions really allowed the project team to engage with planning at a more detailed and effective level. So timely, targeted use of appropriate measurement tools, we think can help inform program planning and implementation. And that's where we'll end it, to leave ourselves some time for questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. That was a very, very interesting description of the research that you did. I have a question. It seems like the process that you went through took quite a lot of work. What's the scope for streamlining this process? Because obviously this would be a fantastically useful tool for readers to be tested and then be shown all of the reading materials which are best suited for their level. Okay,
well, I think one thing to realize is that the Lexile measure, there are some free tools available for that. If you're a teacher in a classroom, there is a Lexile analyzer which is freely available online for people to be able to go in and put in, for example, classroom materials that they're going to be using personally. At the scale we're doing it, actually, well, Renew is the person who did the really hard work there, which was actually, you saw the massive number of pages in there. So scope for streamlining, I think that's difficult. We did it in a very manual capacity. I think on a very large scale, there is the possibility of streamlining it and doing it more in an automated way. But that's something that we need to engage and talk with the MetaMetrics team, who are experts in this on a very large scale. So with the Lexile measure, which Aptis is now aligned to and reporting on, there are millions of texts that have been measured with the Lexile measure, and there are automated processes to do that. So unfortunately, we didn't have access to them, so we had access to Renew, who did it by hand.
Thanks, Jamie. That was a very clear answer. I have a question from Mina, and Renew, maybe you can answer this. How long did this part of the project take?
So for the preparation of the materials, it's actually about 2 weeks, but 2 to 3 weeks, I would say. But then there were also some other preparation stuff going on before and after this. So Jamie, how long was the total amount? Was it 3 months or 2 months?
The Inception phase ran from, I think it was July through to September, but we were, as I said, we were only a small part of the wider Inception phase. So we were brought in, so I think 2 months, yes, is what we had to do the project. So it was a fairly intensive kind of sprint. And this is why we made some compromises there in terms of the amount of information. Like as Renew pointed out, we had to say, look, we can't do everything. So let's choose across the important subject areas and try to get the information we need. So we made some choices in that respect, I think. So, but in terms of time, the other thing to remember, of course, is once again that we were doing this, what we know best, but we were engaging very closely with the local project team. So obviously we had to get the materials from the project teams, they had to collate them, they had to send us. So there's a lot of kind of interactions across streams, I think, that went into getting this done. And obviously we were also working with the MetaMetrics team, Renew pointed out, in the United States, to get advice and to get their kind of sort of oversight of the measurement process of the text to make sure that we were doing this appropriately. So there were actually quite a lot of people involved in supporting it.
Thank you very much. I have one more question. The title of this presentation was Watch the Gap. And you've highlighted this very clear gap between the ability of the teachers and the difficulty of the reading texts. What's the scope for bridging that gap? Do you think it's going to take a long time? Do you think it will be straightforward? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a really good question. And obviously, it depends on what your purpose is, because one of the issues here is that it's not just about English, it's about actually the content areas, learning the teacher education and teacher training in the content areas. And so a decision there was made to actually produce materials in Burmese language as well. And if we heard Rukmini, Dr. Banerjee's plenary this morning talking about the importance of that home language literacy in terms of, sort of building your knowledge framework for the world. So I think it's about, what is the purpose of bridging that gap? Or are there other ways to do it? And in this case, there are other ways to do it, because you can produce Burmese language materials too. Now, if you're actually talking about we need to get these materials in English, or we're actually studying English, then one of the things that you need to do is to be able to identify the texts which are going to help people move through that passage from A2 to B1 to B2. So banging someone on the head with the B2 text is not going to help them get there, although you can manipulate that in ways and do interesting, authentic tasks if you're aware of the difference. The whole point is to be aware of what that gap is. It doesn't mean that you always need to have a text that's A2 level. You could actually give someone an authentic newspaper article, but ask them to pick out specific information such as dates and times and whatnot. That A2 level reading with an authentic text is possible. But you have to be aware of what the gap is in order for you to build in that support and that thinking to help people utilize that text in a meaningful way.
Thanks. Yeah, I suppose that your research highlighting where the level of most of the text was is very useful in a way, because it gives the teachers a goal. If you want to focus on the language ability side rather than the text side, you could say, well, there's this huge wealth of very useful text for people to read, but we're going to have to increase everybody's English level to get there. But at least they know where the target is rather than not knowing.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that's the whole point. It's about knowing. It's about being informed and sort of making your decisions on that sort of informed basis, whether it's for the policy or whether it's as a teacher or as a learner. So you know where you're going. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, thank you both very much for your presentation. That was very, very interesting. Thank you to everybody who attended and watched. We're going to take a 10-minute break now, and then at 2:20 we're going to be talking to Judith Fairbaum and Gemma Bellhouse, who are talking about developing localized texts to meet real-life use of language and numeracy. Thanks again to you, Renyu, and to you, Jamie, for your presentation.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Renyu, too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody,
Take care.
for attending.